Just a moment ago I cut you off on your comments of this tribunal that you would like to see set up to assist people as they are going through this process of being, I'll call it, put under pressure by the banks. And I'll also add to that, with my time in real estate, including having received this head kick myself, that when you are put through that process, it doesn't matter how strong a person you are, you psychologically are paralysed. People refer to it as, oh, that customer's got their head in the sand, or that homeowner's got their head in the sand. That person simply cannot think straight. They stand no chance whatsoever. And that is certainly no revelation to the bankers. They know exactly what they are doing to someone. I have no hesitation whatsoever of saying that the bankers are deliberately inflicting injury on persons, emotionally, psychologically and financially, and it would be perhaps too light to say with reckless disregard for that person's life, and when I say life, as to whether or not that person loses their life. So I think you've got a very clear case in many instances where there would be straight out corporate homicide, but of course it's individuals working in those banks that do it. Now you're looking at a tribunal that would be set up to assist these people and perhaps do an overview on these processes as they get put through this. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I'd be looking at the, of course, when you set up a tribunal, it's got a purposes. It's got a purposes part to it as well. And I'd say the main purpose is to renegotiate contracts. In other words, the banks will have to cut their cloth according to what there is available.
So reversal of the trend of applying penalty interest rates.
Yes.
One of the common things seen is the banks freezing the funds of the bank customer and then bouncing their automatic payments, bouncing their checks, etc. So they're charging them $40 to $60 dishonour fees for situations that the banks themselves have created. And in addition to that, you've then got the penalty interest rates and the legal costs, which they do everything they can to escalate. They certainly could never make a statement that mortgagee sales are a last resort. That's a blatant lie. So a tribunal that would look at, or an advocacy service even, that would look at assisting the customers at that point and give them some hope, even a friendly voice. The tones that are used by the recoveries departments and banks,
unfriendly.
Unfriendly would be an understatement. That's no accident. In a minute or two, I'll go over another case I know with you, and I'll give you a bit of a background on that one, which is not untypical of what banks are prepared to do. But we'll let you just finish with what you were wanting this service to provide.
Yes. Well, I think that for its main purpose would be to recognising the fact of how credit is created, which I think was a bit of an eye-opener to the committee this morning, that these credit contracts are reviewed. I would also like to see it expanded, of course, to business loans, because the small business is the lifeblood of this country. The economy is being sucked dry. The losses of $4 million to the secured creditors in the Crafer debacle unsecured creditors, was minor compared to what unsecured creditors all over the country are suffering every day. But the first, the ambit, I guess, of this bill is more to do with the person who's buying a TV that's too expensive, or they buy a TV that's not too expensive at the time they buy it, and they get a credit. They get a credit on it, and then their world falls apart for some reason. Sometimes it can be a marriage breakup, but often it's to do with loss of a job. And when you see how the credit is provided, and that's not just for home loans, that's for, and probably it's much more is provided for the business sector, and how the banks and those people further up from them, outside of this country, the money markets, can be manipulated by the people who are the source of it. You've got to say we either take action or our country is for skids. We're being bought. I went to the court in the Crafer case and said to them, okay, pension can buy the titles, but who's going to tell them that they didn't actually buy occupation of the land? So, you know, this is a titles market we're talking about, this is the legal fictions we're talking about, etc., etc. But the end result is that you've got people on the sharp end. Small businesses aren't just the name small businesses, they're real people. Homeowners, real people. Real people are being heard, and it's got to stop.
You've mentioned a couple of things there. One was the smaller persons getting taken out with the Crafers. And you've mentioned that the small businesses are the lifeblood of the country. However, wouldn't we be naive to now believe that government actually gives a damn about small business? Let's just take a look at Christchurch and the Christchurch rebuild. Now, at the time, I guess the light was held up that, hey, this is going to create a lot of employment for New Zealanders. In the next 2 to 5 years, 7 years perhaps, with the rebuild of Christchurch, and people thought, well, yes, okay, there's some good could come out of this. We're 3 years down the track, and I don't think there's many people are now going to say, oh, that world we lived in is now a better place because we've all had an economic benefit from the Christchurch quake. The first thing that government did is put a corporation in charge.
Yes.
Fletchers,
yes.
That meant that
which clicks the ticket only. They haven't even really provided work for the people who work for Fletchers.
No, they're bringing in offshore labour.
Yes.
Right? There is nothing there that I can see for New Zealanders apart from stress, apart from being screwed over by the insurance companies, being screwed over by Sarah, being screwed over by the company and getting the government, and getting their intelligence insulted. All they've done is wound up the stress and wound up the post-traumatic stress with people, where people become overwhelmed by circumstances outside of their control. And certainly what government has done is taken the power away from the people and given it to a corporation. Yes. And we've got a repeat going on with the so-called asset sales to Ma and Pa. I think we all know stage 2 is it's going straight to corporations. Yes. And the essentials of life are handed into the powers of corporations. So if the corporation doesn't like you, everything that you need to sustain life is at the flick of a switch of a corporation. And that's what the government's been working on. So when you, in all common sense, point out that we're not looking after the small businesses and the backbone of New Zealand, I will put it to you that there's no intention to look after the backbone of New Zealand. The intention is to hand it over to corporations. And that's what we're seeing.
I guess that, you know, it's, well, why make a submission to a select committee then? There are real people there. There are real people who still, at this stage, have some power. Now, I'm just struggling to remember in what circumstance it was that I heard the other day that a number of small parties have got together and are tipping over the government on some action that the government is wanting to do. If, for example, you mentioned the asset sales, if all of the small parties got together and said, no, we are voting this way on the asset sales, the government would not be able to continue with the asset sales. So MMP has provided a scenario where even a government with a, you know, that, and most of the governments these days have had to actually have coalition partners.
Yes.
But it is not a situation where a party can throw its weight around even the governing party, cannot throw its weight around these days. In reality, if people like I talked to today have some understanding actually of the whole basis of our credit system is a fraud, really, is a fraud, is a way, if the corporations want to take us, they can, but they need the assistance of government, because it's actually Parliament that's going to make the decision on how tough they're going to get with the corporations and how much they're going to keep the corporations off our back. It can happen. It can happen. I'm not feeling that it's hopeless.
This is the same government who's facing a referendum on asset sales.
Yes.
And so 10 days ago they announced without notice that they were selling off, was it shares in Air New Zealand?
I have a feeling maybe that was where all of the smaller parties got together and tipped them.
And that was to beat the referendum.
Yes, yes.
So it was like 2 days' notice, we're selling these assets, we're beating the referendum.
Yes.
Then we've got the deep sea oil. Now, if you or I want to put up a fence at our house, we're up to a resource consent, which will simply screw our lives over some considerable time. And yet we can have offshore interests come in and have deep sea oil wells in place without our even knowing about it. Now, how can we have any confidence that government will do the right thing when government leaders deliberately done that behind our backs? It's so in our faces.
Well,
how can we believe in that system anymore?
In the end, you've got to have the numbers. You've got to have the numbers in Parliament. I still believe in Parliament. I still believe that that it can be used for our good. But we have to give them information. I could see there was a blank look on the committee's face, collective face this morning about it. They obviously hadn't read the private placement document, or if they had read it, they didn't realise the implications of it. But it is a powerful document. So, the more people who wake up, the more chance we've got of avoiding the nightmare.
I think we're well into the nightmare.
Yes.
I think we're very well advanced on it.
Yes, true.
And how we change it.
I'd like to finish on an upbeat note.
Yeah.
I'm a born optimist.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the MMP, as you say, we only need to look at what Winston Peters was. He was kingmaker, wasn't he?
Yes.
And it's that 1 or 2 seats that can get a disproportionate say in power.
Yes.
And then, of course, it comes down to the integrity and the wisdom of that.
But I mean, at least you can say for Winston, he's had a go. Now we've got to have all these other little parties having a go. If they reach the threshold, if they get into Parliament, they are one more nail in the coffin of the corporations. The corporation, in its nature, relies on force, right?
Yes.
Now, if you could chip away at that force with an alternative force, okay, it might be made up of a whole lot of sticks in a bundle instead of a big cudgel, but it's still got the same effect. I don't think that's like the fascist idea, doesn't it? All of the sticks in a bundle.
It does.
But in actual fact, it can whack the other side just as hard.
Well, when you look at the elections or the electoral system as we've got at the moment, in theory we've got a democracy and the constituents get a representative in Parliament. However, that's not the case at all. Like, if you've only got half the population voting, and say national, I think it was less than 30% of the population actually voted for national.
Yes.
However, even the MPs within national, they're not following their constituents and they're not following their conscience. They're following a party line which John Key is dictating to them, and chances are he got those instructions from America.
Yes, that's right.
So the country's not even being run from in New Zealand.
But that's always been the case since we've had party politics. In fact, the Westminster system and party politics are inconsistent with each other. The Westminster system is representative government, and the party politics is who's got the strongest party whip, or who can discipline their party members. So they're actually they're inconsistent with each other. But that's been the case for a very, very long time. And it depends on, I mean, look at the history of Nazism. I mean, that was party politics in its most virulent form. The party itself dictated to its members exactly what they would do. There was no chance for conscience in that party.
Are we far off that?
No, we're not. But we're still sitting here making a presentation.
Oh, most definitely.
Dropping ideas into the right ears and minds.
I have serious doubts that anyone sitting in that select committee, if they thought they could be stepping on the banking industry's toes, would give any consideration in that direction. Right? It's pretty hard to get into Parliament unless you've got a fair amount of financial backing in the first place, and I say that in the form of advertising funds, etc. You've only got to look at what John Banks and Len Brown were getting in, and who they were receiving money from to run for the Mayor of Auckland. And,
yes. But then, I mean, all of that has come to a good conclusion too, hasn't it? I mean, we've got a private prosecution that people now know can happen, even though it has been possible for how many, decades.
Graham McCready has done a great thing there, and let's hope he sees it.
Yes,
let's hope that the system does not now let him down.
Yes.
The simple fact is that our Prime Minister has left John Banks sitting in there as one vote he needs in Parliament, controlling us and dictating laws to us that we don't want. And we've still got Len Brown, despite his exposure on a number of things, and he could argue that it's legal, it might not be lawful, but it's legal. He's still sitting there as the mayor of the biggest country, the biggest city in New Zealand. So he's arguably the second most powerful man in the country.
Yes.
So it's all very well our knowing these people are corrupt. However, they're still sitting in those positions. So the true accountability has not yet clicked in. One would have thought that the public would be so outraged, they'd go and drag them out of their offices and say, you have no authority over us, you're completely unsuitable. And we haven't seen that yet. And whether that can be done peaceably, I don't know.
Oh, I'm always of the belief that the pen is mightier than the sword, Graham.
Yes, it is. It certainly is. There can be no debate over that. But just at this stage, we haven't seen that accountability, or the public demanding that accountability.